Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about running back news and rankings changes that have occurred in just the last 24 hours. With Dalvin Cook signing with the New York Jets and Ezekiel Elliott joining the New England Patriots, there's a lot of fantasy implications regarding those two prospects, but additionally, guys like Breece and Rhamondre Stevenson, and how the addition to those running backs to these backfields are absolutely going to impact their fantasy upside going forward. So we'll talk about my thoughts and the statistics that justify my adjustments in terms of my rankings going into the 2023 season to give you guys as much information as possible so you can make the most informed decisions as you approach your 2023 fantasy football drafts. Now, besides talking about Dalvin Cook, Breece Hall, Ezekiel Elliott, and Rhamondre Stevenson, I additionally want to talk about guys like Tony Pollard. The Dallas Cowboys were another organization in which there were rumors regarding Ezekiel Elliott and or Dalvin Cook signing there. Now that that didn't happen, there's a lot of potential upside for Tony Pollard for the remainder of the season, considering he has the entire backfield to himself. And like I mentioned all the time, opportunity leads to success. The more times you have, an opportunity to touch the ball, whether it's on the ground or through the air at the running back position, you're going to score more fantasy points. So we'll talk about him, the implications there. Additionally, there have been pretty good news revolving J.K. Dobbins, his return from injury, and of course, coming off the PUP list, the physically unable to perform. We'll talk about him. And additionally, some good news on the front of Jonathan Taylor returning to training camp, which obviously all signs are pointing towards progress. Hopefully, we'll be able to play. Before we get into talking about all these running backs, as I'll share all the data that I've collected in regards to these players going into the 2023 season, a reminder, we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season with a singular goal of trying to help you guys win a 2023 fantasy football championship. So if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe. Our goal is currently 100,000 subscribers, so help me reach my goal, and I'll try to help you reach your goal of winning a fantasy championship this upcoming season. Additionally, for those of you who want more content outside of just the videos that I continue to produce every single day, be sure to go down to the description of the video and head on over to Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you use code Andrew to sign up and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, you're not only going to get the first-time deposit match, you're also going to get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide and rankings. This draft guide is hundreds of hours of information that I've collected this offseason and in off seasons prior that give you guys an understanding of my methodology as to how I approach drafts and how I find success. So hopefully all the statistics I've gathered and the approach that I've gathered in regards to that draft guide can help lead to your success this offseason. Now, on top of it, the rankings that are associated with this draft guide are by position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense by tier. Half PPR, full PPR, 4-point per passing touchdown, 6-point per passing touchdown. Additionally, we have top 200 flex that includes quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends for all scoring formats. So for those of you who are interested, be sure to check that out. Additionally, I will be sending you guys updates every single week regarding these rankings, especially when there are some circumstances with running back signing. There's going to be a lot of flux, so we're going to have to adjust those rankings. I'll send them to you guys, so check that spam folder in order to go ahead and get those updated rankings. Also, speaking of updated rankings, from weeks 1 through 18, by using code Andrew, making that first-time deposit, I will also be sending you Sunday morning rankings by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, every single Sunday morning, with the singular purpose of trying to get your lineup set for the entirety of the season. So I'm trying to help you as much as I possibly can. Help me help you. Sign up today. For those of you who are wondering if you're eligible, the map to the right side of the screen will determine your eligibility based on your location. So go ahead, draft today, gain some experience via the many best ball drafts, the puppy drafts, via Underdog Fantasy today. Thank you very much. Also, draft responsibly. Let's get into talking about some running back news and rankings changes. First and foremost, let's talk about Dalvin Cook joining the New York Jets. Like I mentioned a couple weeks back in regards to the ranking that I had for Breece Hall, there was a very high expectation of Dalvin Cook joining the organization due to the visit that he had to training camp, and additionally Vegas having him as a minus 400 favorite to sign with them. So, Vegas knows a couple things, to say the very least. Now, in regards to his overall ranking, in which I've adjusted him, prior to him signing with the New York Jets, I think I had him as like my number 30, 31 overall ranked running back. He pretty much sits in a similar range, like RB 28 to 30. Is where I anticipate to see Dalvin Cook produce. Because going into this upcoming season, especially considering he's joining a backfield with Breece Hall, who is coming off an ACL injury that was sustained in October of 2022. Again, the recovery time is typically what? They say 9 months. But in order to be at a full peak Breece Hall, he's going to need a little bit more time. He's going to need time to at least kind of find his bearings once again this season, especially once we get into the regular season. So in the meanwhile, Dalvin Cook will be leading this backfield. The running back in the last 4 seasons has ranked as the number 5, 3, 15, and 10 overall running back in a half PPR scoring format. The only season in which he was out of the top 10 was because he missed a significant amount of time due to injury. But speaking of injuries and Dalvin Cook, This is a guy that has dealt with an ACL in his rookie season, and he came back and he battled back and eventually got to being where he is today. So he'll be able to kind of hopefully give some wise words in the direction of Breece Hall. But until then, he's going to be the lead back of this team. He's going to dominate majority of the touches. When you look at last season's Dalvin Cook, even though he has taken huge steps downward in terms of his overall opportunity and production and his efficiency, he was still relevant last season, averaging in terms of the 16 games that he played, 15.81 attempts per game, which led to 71 rushing yards, a half a rushing touchdown per game, 4.47 yards per carry on average, a 3.18 yard after contact per attempt average. Again, great numbers, and of course was heavily utilized in the receiving game, despite the fact that the Minnesota Vikings weren't getting their running backs a lot of opportunities in terms of targets. When we talk about the New York Jets in just a moment, Aaron Rodgers, Nathaniel Hackett, their influences, they're going to see a lot of targets go in the direction of Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook because of how much they want to implement the receiving backs within this offense on a weekly basis. Now, in terms of the production that he saw last season, 13.51 fantasy points per game on average, we're not going to see that out of Dalvin Cook. Perhaps we'll see it in certain circumstances. Perhaps if Breece Hall has a setback or if they want to slowly integrate him within the offense in the early weeks. But this is a running back that last season didn't miss a game due to injury. That's the first time he's accomplished that in his entire career. Played 841 of the 1,168 offensive snaps. He played 72% of the offensive snaps for the Minnesota Vikings last season. And even though that's a really incredible number, he stayed healthy. He's never going to see anything close to that this upcoming season. Playing 72% of the offensive snaps is very unlikely. And that's why he sits at like RB 28 to 30 pretty much. Because the opportunities he's going to be given are pretty much capped in my mind. There are going to be circumstances where he is allowed to run freely because he's on a hot hand kind of measure. But outside of that, there are very little circumstances where he's going to be given the entirety of this backfield, which certainly decreases his overall value going within this season. Now, when we talk about the other side of this conversation, when we flip the coin to Breece Hall is an incredible running back. We witnessed that last season. I mean, the averages that he produced in the 6 games in which he was healthy last season, weeks 1 through 6, as you can see on screen, the guy was averaging 15.4 fantasy points per game, getting himself a lot of utilization on the ground and through the air. And this was all while he was only playing 49.05% of the offensive snaps. That should just give you an idea as to what the heck was going on within that organization. And I don't know why they didn't give him more opportunities earlier. Mike LaFleur certainly dropped the ball there in regards to the early integration of Breece Hall. But nonetheless, without as much opportunity as we anticipated him to get, he still was relevant in fantasy regardless. And he should be this upcoming season, assuming that ACL injury isn't something that is going to hinder him. But we have seen over the course of the last couple seasons, when we even go back to 2015, running backs coming back from an ACL injury do not have immediate success in that first year of return. The only running backs who have since 2015, truly are Dalvin Cook, who finishes the RB 29, and Saquon Barkley, who finishes the RB 32. And that's 12 different running backs who came back from an ACL injury in that first year since 2015, which includes Jamal Charles, Dion Lewis, Darren Sproles, Dalvin Cook, Jay Ajayi, Jerick McKinnon, Rashad Penny, Tariq Cohen, Lamar Miller, Rex Burkhead, Saquon Barkley, and J.K. Dobbins. Now, when you go ahead and you look at the caliber of those running backs, the ages in which they sustain those injuries, yes, we're looking at Breece Hall at the same level of a Saquon Barkley and a Dalvin Cook. And there is a potential in which he could finish in those similar ranges of RB 32 to RB 29. At this current moment in time, I have him as my RB 25. I do believe that now that Dalvin Cook is within this organization, there is less of a pressure for Breece Hall to immediately make an impact week 1. He came back to practice today. It's funny enough, we don't know if the ramp-up process for Breece Hall was, hey, we're going to get him back on Tuesday, August 15th, and he's ready to go. But as soon as, it may be a coincidence, but I think it's not. As soon as Dalvin Cook signs yesterday, Breece Hall is ready to practice today. That in itself gives me an indication that Breece Hall is ready to get back to work and ensure that, Dalvin Cook doesn't come in and steal his job. Now, that can be a positive if he ends up balling out and he fully is recovered from this injury. But if he's not recovered and he's forcing himself back, could be very detrimental for his entire season. So to be careful, again, I have him currently as my RB 24, RB 25 and a half PPR going forward. Now, when I look at the potential of a Breece Hall and the likelihood of this team continuing to pass the ball, I know that there's a potential in which Breece Hall could very easily get himself 150 rushing attempts and 40 receptions this year. I want to put that out there mainly because since 2019, there have been 47 different running backs that have had 150 rushing attempts and 40 receptions within a singular year. 45 of those 47 running backs finished with a minimum of 159.8 fantasy points. Over the course of the last 4 seasons, since 2019, the 159.8 fantasy points has equaled the number 23 back, number 20 back, number 24 back, and number 24 back. That's why I currently have Breece Hall there. I think he's capable of achieving those numbers. And even with the slow return, the effectiveness and the efficiency that he presented last season, averaging 0.88 fantasy points per attempt from weeks 1 through 7 and 0.12 fantasy points per target, which were almost identical to, Austin Eckler's overall efficiency last season with the volume of touches he had. Hall is in a fantastic position. He's just going to have to survive with 50% of the offensive touches and snaps. And if he's able to do so and accumulate a lot of receiving work, that is wherein lies Breece Hall's potential for upside. Now, when we talk about the Jets offense and how it's going to kind of incorporate these running backs and why I have the excitement that I do regarding their receiving work and how that's going to help elevate both of these backs in terms of fantasy purposes. When we look at the Green Bay Packers offense from 2019 through 2021, specifically looking at that spectrum of time, because Aaron Rodgers was the starting quarterback and Nathaniel Hackett was the offensive coordinator. Now, Nathaniel Hackett is currently the offensive coordinator of the New York Jets. And when you take into account the fact that this team gave their running backs a lot of opportunity throughout that span of time, but specifically with number 8 in terms of running back targets with 342, number 8 in terms of running back receptions, and we're obviously number 6 in receiving yards and number 2 in receiving touchdowns. That's a lot of opportunity going in the direction of these running backs, and that hasn't really been uncommon for Nathaniel Hackett. When you look at his entire career, regardless of where he's coached, you even go back to last season when he was the head coach of the Denver Broncos, they targeted their running backs the 8th most times amongst all teams in the National Football League last season, had the 7th most receptions at the running back position, 5th most receiving yards, and 15th most receiving touchdowns. They want to get their running backs opportunity out of the backfield, and certainly so does Aaron Rodgers. We have witnessed this over the course of the last 4 years with the Green Bay Packers in terms of statistics that running backs have accumulated over the course of that time. Specifically, we have seen Aaron Rodgers throw the ball to Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, A.J. Dillon a boatload of times, and they have accumulated a lot of statistics, specifically from 2019 through 2021 when Nathaniel Hackett was there. 106 targets, 115 targets, 121 targets. Those numbers probably are going to stay at a very consistent rate, considering the talent that they have at the backfield. And if, in fact, we're able to see an even distribution, there is a good likelihood that both these running backs could end up getting 35, 40, 45 potential receptions. And if that's going to be the case, their fantasy values continue to creep forward. We got to remember, since 2019, Aaron Jones has been the number 2 receiving option for the Green Bay Packers. He was number 2 in targets for 4 consecutive years and number 2 in receptions throughout that span of time. So much opportunity was given to Aaron Jones. And again, it's going to continue to be the case this upcoming season, because when we talk about Nathaniel Hackett, besides the Denver job, the Green Bay job, you go back to his work as an offensive coordinator with the Jacksonville Jaguars from 2016 to 2018. He gave his running backs throughout that span of time the 3rd most opportunities. Of course, we saw a lot of utilization with Leonard Fournette throughout that span of time out of the backfield, specifically as a receiver. You go back to 2013 through 2014 with the Buffalo Bills. He gave his running backs 515 and 507 overall opportunities in those 2 seasons. Again, a lot of opportunity behind an offensive line that is going to be bottom 5 in terms of run blocking. The passing game is going to be open for these 2 backs, and why I currently have them ranked as such. Moving on, let's talk about another backfield, the New England Patriots, still within the same division, the AFC East, but Ezekiel Elliott signing with the New England Patriots wasn't really a surprise either. He went and visited them, worked out for them, then went to dinner with Mac Jones, and 2 weeks later, we have him signed and in this backfield. At this current moment in time, I see Ezekiel Elliott being a running back that I'm ranking outside of the top 36. I think he's in the 40s. I think he's very similar to running backs like Tyler Algier in the idea that, yes, he's going to get rushing attempts, but he is going to heavily rely upon touchdowns to make his given week. Now, when we look at his averages last season in the 15 games that he played, obviously 15.4 rushing attempts per game, fantastic. That was a great opportunity with the Dallas Cowboys. He'll never see anything similar to that this season. But his effectiveness was at a bare minimum. He has degraded to being a running back that, in my opinion, I don't know if we're going to see any great performance out of Ezekiel Elliott this season unless he finds the end zone. He averaged 3.79 yards per carry last season and only 2.74 yards after contact per attempt. That in itself is very, discouraging to the potential. And another stat that really is important to look at in regards to Ezekiel Elliott last season is that he did not get much receiving utilization. He was not the guy that was primarily out there on third downs. In terms of pass blocking situations on third downs, we saw Tony Pollard just as much out there on the field last season. So when he's not getting the receiving upside, he's going to get himself probably 8 to 10 to 12 rushing attempts in a singular game. He'll have himself the goal line work, sure, but he's not going to be anything close to what he was last season or in seasons past. So if he's going to be like an RB40, he's going to be the Damian Harris of the 2023 season. When we look at Damian Harris and his contributions last season, in the 8 games in which he played, where he was a primary influencer in this backfield, a guy that in those 8 games got 10 touches minimum in each of those. The only other 3 games that he played last season, he didn't eclipse 10 touches, and additionally only played 11, 9, and 6 snaps. So when he was an actual contributor to this backfield, averaged 11.75 rushing attempts per game. So again, 12 touches per game there on the ground. Got himself a couple sprinkles of targets because again, Mac Jones loves to throw the ball out of the backfield. But in terms of his effectiveness, significantly more effective than what we saw Ezekiel Elliott put forth last season on tape and in terms of statistics. Damian Harris is a better version of Zeke. And there's a reason why Damian Harris immediately throughout free agency is signed with the Buffalo Bills while Zeke takes this long to join this organization. The way that I think about this, Ezekiel Elliott is not someone who's going to immediately impact Rhamondre Stevenson at a negative point to where Rhamondre is an unacceptable fantasy prospect. I think in terms of the scenario that we're currently in, Ezekiel Elliott signing with the New England Patriots is the best case scenario for Rhamondre Stevenson because it's significantly better than Dalvin Cook or Leonard Fournette or Kareem Hunt signing there, who all have significantly more efficient seasons in the last couple of years and are all receiving threats, which Ezekiel Elliott certainly is not. So I think, again, 8, 10 to 12 rushing attempts in a singular game, that's on the table for Ezekiel Elliott. But how does it impact Rhamondre Stevenson's upside for the remainder of the season, especially if Zeke is only going to be a running back that maybe sits around RB40 to RB45 this upcoming season, assuming he doesn't accumulate too many touchdowns? We got to remember last season, Rhamondre Stevenson was associated with an offense that was at an all-time worst. They scored the least amount of total touchdowns since 2002 with 31 total offensive touchdowns for the Patriots and the fewest amount of rushing touchdowns they have scored since 2003, which was 12 rushing touchdowns. When I look at Rhamondre Stevenson with the implementation of Ezekiel Elliott, he goes from being my number RB9, 10 to being like RB12. He's going to have all of the receiving upside certainly, baked into his overall value. He's still going to get himself a lot of opportunities on the ground, even though we anticipate to see Ezekiel Elliott accumulate maybe 160, 170 rushing attempts over the course of this season, assuming he stays healthy. We should also continue to see Rhamondre Stevenson push towards the number of 200 to 240 rushing attempts. If we're in that range, 240 rushing attempts, the upside of getting himself 60 plus receptions, if not more, if Mac Jones continues to stay the starter of this organization, he should be in a perfect position to succeed in my mind. Though he doesn't have as much upside based on the fact that Zeke will be the goal line back of this team, there is a little bit of a concern, but you have to look at it this way. In the last 2 seasons, in the games in which Rhamondre Stevenson has played 50% or more of the offensive snaps, he's averaging 14.95 half PPR fantasy points per game. In games in which he's given 15 or more touches, averaging 16.16 fantasy points per game. Last season, of his overall 210 rushing attempts, 50 of those overall rushes led to 10 or more yards. That's nearly 15% of his rushing attempts, leading to 10 or more overall yards. He has the burst. He has the effectiveness. Last season, amongst all running backs with 100 rushing attempts minimum, he was number 2 amongst all backs in the league in terms of yards after contact per attempt with a 3.81 yard average. Additionally, last season, amongst all running backs with 100 rushing attempts minimum, he was number 5 amongst all of them in terms of yards per carry, averaging a 4.95 yard per carry average. He has been extremely effective. He has the burst to break away. And even last season, on 20.7% of his rushing attempts, he forced missed tackles, 71 forced missed tackles on the 210 rushing attempts that he produced last season. There is a high upside effectiveness, receiving upside, and though the rushing touchdowns may not immediately be there, but you got to also remember that he didn't have a lot of rushing touchdowns last season. Within the red zone last year, he had 3 rushing touchdowns. Within the 5-yard line last season, he had 7 rushing attempts that led to 2 rushing touchdowns. As a whole, the New England Patriots offense last season, within the 5-yard line, only had 11 rushing attempts. So Rhamondre Stevenson getting himself 7 of those 11 rushing attempts, getting 2 out of the 5 total rushing touchdowns. He had himself great opportunity, but he doesn't rely upon rushing touchdowns to be the only factor as to whether or not he's going to be relevant in fantasy. Sure, he may not have as much overall upside due to Zeke's presence, but I don't think it kills his value. That's why I currently have him sitting at my RB12. It's basically an idea of who's going to do more damage. Ezekiel Elliott to Rhamondre Stevenson, or Tank Bigsby to Travis Etienne. And in my mind, honestly, I don't think Zeke does that much damage in comparison, and the receiving upside of Rhamondre leads me in his direction. All right, let's go ahead and move on to talk about some other running backs that I wanted to mention. Tony Pollard, Jonathan Taylor, and J.K. Dobbins. Let's begin with Tony Pollard in specific, mainly because Tony Pollard, by not having Ezekiel Elliott and or Dalvin Cook join the Dallas Cowboys this offseason being signed, there's going to be a lot of upside for Tony Pollard being a top 5 to 6 running back in fantasy football, considering how much opportunity is available. We got to remember last season, Ezekiel Elliott had 230 plus rushing attempts within this offense, had himself 12 rushing touchdowns. If those opportunities are up for grabs, sure, you can give it to someone like Malik Davis or Deuce Vaughn, but there isn't going to be a number 2 running back within this offense that deserves touches more than Tony Pollard. There isn't going to be someone vying for opportunities because they're extremely efficient. This is Tony Pollard's backfield to lose, and he's not going to, considering how effective he's been throughout his entire career. In my mind, Tony Pollard, and you'll see this via ADP on drafts like Underdog, he's going to rise on draft boards. There's going to be a conversation eventually to where he breaks into that top 5, because without a doubt in my mind, he has top 5 upside, if not top 3, if no other running backs like a Kareem Hunt or a Leonard Fournette signed with this organization this offseason. I'm crossing my fingers as we currently speak that nothing of that overall extent takes place. And if it doesn't, we're going to be in a fantastic position to succeed in regards to his fantasy upside within the season. Now, as of the recording of this video, Tony Pollard sits at like RB7 on my list, behind guys like Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, and I would say probably Derrick Henry. I could see him creeping ahead of guys like Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb, because the upside is certainly going to be there. Does he have the ability to rush for more yardage? No, but he has the ability to catch a lot more passes this season and be more fantasy relevant down in the red zone, considering how many red zone opportunities this offense had last season. I'm not saying he's jumping them in my rankings. I'm just saying that the potential for taking him ahead of those 2 other prospects, considering the age of Derrick Henry, the age of Nick Chubb, it is an argument to be made. I'm not doing it personally, but it's still on the table. All right, moving on. Another player I wanted to mention, Jonathan Taylor. Rehabbing has pretty much been the entire conversation, besides the contract negotiations that he has had with the organization. Obviously been unhappy, but earlier this week, yesterday specifically, returned to training camp. Yes, he is still rehabbing the ankle that he obviously had to have surgery on last season, but this is progress. The fact that he's back at camp is certainly progress, and I'm beginning to move him back into my top 10 rankings, maybe even ahead of guys like Josh Jacobs, because Josh Jacobs is nowhere to be found at this current moment in time. Even though Josh Jacobs isn't rehabbing, the fact that he's not at training camp and they're not finding at least more momentum in terms of securing a deal with him this upcoming season is concerning. Jonathan Taylor, we know what he's capable of. He's getting back into the top 10 of the running back conversation in my mind going forward. Another really good piece of news in regards to J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins was removed from the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list, and he's back at practice, fully ready to go. John Harbaugh was quoted earlier today saying, J.K. Dobbins is 100% healthy. Now, this isn't really much of a surprise, primarily because besides the PUP list and him being able to pass his physical, there was concerns that J.K. Dobbins was primarily not practicing this month because he wanted a new contract, because he's in a contract year. Obviously wasn't able to secure one. Now he's got to go earn one. He is a very talented running back. At Ohio State, in his rookie year, was extremely relevant in fantasy. And additionally, last season, when at a full pace, especially once he returned from the injury and the surgery, the scope that he had on his knee, was extremely relevant for fantasy purposes, despite still having the limp, still having lack of, kind of lateral mobility. I think there's a lot of upside for J.K. Dobbins to absolutely be in that top 20 conversation of the running back position going forward. And that's pretty much where I have him ranked. Now that he's back, he's going to show himself a fully healthy rate. And I'm even hearing rumors and a couple reports in regards to Melvin Gordon, who was signed this offseason by the organization, potentially being a casualty of the cuts that we're going to see in the coming weeks by the time training camp is at an end. So this is really good news regarding these 3 running backs. They're all kind of creeping forward in their overall rankings based on the news regarding, of course, the health, the return to practice, and no running backs being signed to their backfield. All right, that's going to cover it for me today. I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. If you guys have not yet already, be sure to click the like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you have not yet already. Hopefully, all the information that I've divulged in regards to these players with Dalvin Cook, Breece Hall, Rhamondre, Stevenson, Ezekiel Elliott, and the 3 that you can see on screen. Hopefully, this leads you to having far more informed decisions as you approach your 2023 fantasy football drafts. Tomorrow, we'll be back with some draft strategy videos in regards to the 2023 season, so keep an eye out for that. Also, a reminder, for those of you who are trying to get an upper hand upon your league mates this upcoming season, be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. The link is down in the description. Sign up with code Andrew, make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, and you'll have rankings not only this offseason with the draft guide, you'll also have rankings every single Sunday morning, emailed to you with flex, every position, all the stuff that you could possibly imagine, just one minimum deposit of $10. So check it out today. Draft responsibly via Underdog Fantasy. Gain that experience. And until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.